Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Ghost Biker Garage. If it's Thursday night, you know we're here with another live stream. We had to miss last week because I was traveling, but got something special this week. There's going to be two shows this week. Tonight's guest is, a lot of you know him, saw him on an earlier episode, but Jake Fife is going to be here tonight. And then I'm going to be doing a special live stream to catch up for last week on Saturday night with my friend Ryan Rush. I've been trying to have him on the show for, since we started doing this, and it just seems like everything has kind of happened. And when we try to go on, we've not been able to do it. So again, I'd like to welcome everyone on here. Hope that everyone is staying warm and safe. I know that a lot of the country is in this deep freeze right now. A lot of people without power and everything. So our thoughts and prayers are with all of them. But again, welcome everyone that's here. And I'm going to go ahead and bring my special guest, Jake, on. Let's get him in. Hey, Jake, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Doing well. Thank you for coming back on. I know that I had you on the first part of January, and we kind of talked a little bit about what you do. And then we've been kind of talking since, and I know you've been working on a lot of really interesting projects and everything. And so I wanted to have you back so you could talk specifically about that. But first, if you don't mind kind of telling everybody just a little bit about who you are, how you got started, and what you do.
Sure. Once again, thank you for having me on. For those of you who don't know, I'm Jake Fife. I am the co-founder of Fife Paranormal, based out of the Shenandoah Valley here in the state of Virginia. I've been a paranormal investigator for over a decade now, but the paranormal has always been a part of my life. In fact, my earliest childhood memory is seeing shadow figures darting in and out of the hallway at the end of my bed. So at the age of 10, I started having even more experiences before we moved to the house that I'm currently in now. And there was one experience I remember seeing some shadow figures up near this water tower that was being constructed. And to me, they were Native American in origin. One looked like a warrior with a headdress, and the other seemed like a Native American maiden. And there was just something about that experience that just stuck with me, like no experience has stuck with me since. Every time I talk about it, I can see it in my mind's eye, almost like I'm traveling back to 2010, which seems like decades ago. But my dad, Chris, the other co-founder of Fife Paranormal, he's been a paranormal investigator for basically as long as he's been alive. And so I started asking him questions about the stuff I was experiencing. And over the years, I started doing my own research. Being homeschooled definitely helped with that. And I finally got my dad's equipment out. I was cleaning out our spare room one day, and I found it was like a huge bag, like an old camera bag, and it had some cassette recorders, an old camera, candles, and a bunch of other retro equipment. And that's how I started my investigations. I would load the cassettes into the tape recorder, attach the external microphone. That was probably, from the early to mid 90s. And I would go out to the abandoned buildings we have on our property, which we have an abandoned caretaker's house, barn, and an old kitchen, because back in the day, kitchens used to be separate from the main house. And I would do my EVP sessions there. And slowly but surely, I started branching out to doing cemeteries, graveyards, haunted roads, haunted bridges, stuff like that. And slowly over the years, I would start doing bigger locations. And at first, it was about getting answers to questions I had. But over the course of my investigation, my 11 years of doing this, it's also morphed into helping people who have as many questions as I do. And definitely not just in the paranormal, but I love helping people in general. So if there's something I can do to help people that feel attacked by a haunt, or they feel scared by stuff they're experiencing, I like to do what I can to help them out. And over the past 2.5, 3 years, I've incorporated my love of film and filmmaking into the paranormal, and to kind of take things up another notch. And last year, I filmed my very first paranormal documentary, which was at the Martinsburg Roundhouse in Martinsburg, West Virginia. And I'm going to be releasing my second paranormal/historical documentary here on the 27th, called The Ghosts of Guilford Courthouse.
Awesome. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. I know when you approached me about coming back on and talking about this, I was so excited because you cover things a lot like I really enjoy watching, and a lot like I do, as far as with covering the historical aspect of it. I know that that's something that for me, and it appears with what you put out as well, that the history is first and foremost and one of the most important things when it comes to these paranormal documentaries.
Oh, heck yeah. I mean, I've always been a history buff all my life. Even when I was young, till I'm like 6 or 7 years old, I would come home on Sundays and watch. They would have this show called The Revolution, and I would watch that. I would watch Civil War documentaries, World War II, and then also the family. My family is big into history, and so I was always hearing stories from medieval times, World War II, and also the communities that I lived in growing up. When people heard that I was into the paranormal, they would say, "Hey, Jake, there's a haunted shed down there, or this road where this person died in 1920." And it was those local legends that I was told about at a very early age. And because a lot of the big name locations like St. Albans or hospitals or stuff like that, they require you to be 18 years old in most cases to investigate, aside from public stuff, of course. So my only option in terms of investigating locations was doing these local legends, cemeteries, and places like this that a lot of people, they don't really think about. And it's kind of a shame because those are some of my favorite locations to investigate, even to this day.
Yes, and and a lot of people that might not know, you're quite young. You just before you were on the last time, you were about to celebrate your 21st birthday. So, so I think that's really cool that your parents were supportive and allowed you to essentially cut your teeth doing these investigations with your dad, and then also going to these different locations that are some of the lesser known. I know that I had not really heard a lot of the history about the Guilford Courthouse until I had started, I heard what you were doing and I started doing a little research myself. So what actually drove you to investigate or to cover this location?
So Guilford Courthouse is my favorite battlefield that I've been to yet. And I have been to Gettysburg, Antietam, Fort Sumter. I've been to a lot of really cool locations. But there's just something about Guilford Courthouse. I don't know if, it's a past life thing. I really don't know how to explain, but whenever I'm there, and I've been there, I think 3 times so far, I feel completely calm there, at peace. Like no matter what's going on in the world, what situation, whether it be physical, psychological, financial, that's stressing me out, when I'm there, I'm completely at peace. And the Revolutionary War is my favorite subject in history to read about. And the Battle of Guilford Courthouse was what led to the surrender of Yorktown, which ultimately led to, America becoming a country. And then also most of my favorite American Revolutionary War characters were at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. And also, totally geeking out here, but my favorite part of the American Revolutionary War to study is the Southern Campaign, because it's so complex. I could talk for hours about the Southern Campaign, but this was the culmination of everything that had happened, the 3.5 years, all the bad blood, the civil wars, the murders, people that we would label psychopaths rising to power, doing terrible things, and then getting their comeuppance eventually. This was the culmination of all of that. And, the cherry on top of the cake for me is that the battlefield is said to be extremely haunted by not just, ghost soldiers, ghost animals and stuff like that, but there's also a headless horseman that is supposedly seen around a certain area, which is close to where my ancestors fought at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. From the genealogy I've done, I had, to my knowledge, 2 ancestors that fought at Guilford Courthouse, and I know exactly where they stood, on the ground. So when I do my documentary, I'm going back to the place where they actually stood, almost 300 years ago. And it's all of these different things that come together and make this literally the perfect project for me.
Absolutely. And when you can find that familial connection, then that just makes it even more awesome. And I mean, it sounds like you're doing some very deep research into this, especially knowing knowing that about your ancestors, as well as, where their placement during that battle.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it is a labor of love. I've got a book I got for Christmas. It's called Long, Bloody, and Obstinate. It's one of the best historical books I've ever read. It's a complete, detailed account of the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. And I can't remember the name of the authors off the top of my head, but they're a lot like me. They include the smallest details possible, down to, what undershirt a lot of these soldiers were wearing, the small little correspondence and chitter chatter between the lines. And it's stuff like that when you're doing the research on a location, you never know when that information is going to play a part into your investigation. Mm-hmm. And that's what's so cool about Guilford Courthouse, is because where it was a large battle, there were a lot of people. When the pension foundation was formed, a lot of people submitted their accounts of the battle in order to get these pensions.
Wow. And, and you had mentioned a little while ago about, talking about the Southern campaign and stuff. And, what I find to be interesting about that is the fact that, there was so much conflict just within the area. You would think mm-hmm. of, it was brother fighting brother and that sort of thing, where it was, there was a lot of strife within. Just the area, right. Not just, the enemy was closer than you think.
Yeah, it was a straight up civil war. And, unfortunately, a lot of people, mainly in South Carolina, there were over 130 battles fought in South Carolina alone where there wasn't a single British soldier in sight. Now, that's ridiculous. Yeah. And what had happened is a lot of these people that were in power in these communities, they had these old grudges, Hatfield and McCoy style grudges. And when the war broke out, they saw it as an excuse to go and, basically get revenge on these people. 30 years ago, Mr. Smith took a cow from me, but he never got anything for it. So I'm going to get my sons and a bunch of our friends, and we're going to go slaughter him and his family and burn his house down. That's what was going on. And they were doing it in the name of independence or the name of, loyalist. And that's what is so interesting, especially because you had the old world style of warfare, which is kind of weird to think about, but there were fine rules to warfare in the 18th century. And the British Army, they were the most powerful army in the world. They were the most powerful nation in the world at the time. And so they expected that anyone and everyone that they encountered would follow these strict guidelines on how to conduct warfare. And when they got to South Carolina, they didn't expect anything different. And so after they took Charleston, South Carolina in 1780, and they started sending out these little parties into the backwoods, they realized that they had stirred up a hornet's nest. And at first they thought that they could contain it, but ultimately they found out they couldn't do anything about it. It was, it's like watching a fire go out of control and you're out of water. You just kind of watch it burn and hope it doesn't get you.
Wow. How long did that actual battle at the courthouse go on, or in that specific area?
So the battle itself only lasted a little over an hour and a half to 2 hours. Although there was some separate action that took place for an additional hour. But it started off as three small skirmishes, and then it became the actual battle. And then it broke off to about 2 separate actions, which is technically still a part of Guilford Courthouse, but they were far enough away to where you could almost consider them separate engagements. And then there was a little bit of running action throughout the evening.
Okay. And you had, so in your documentary, are you covering, so you're covering the history, are you covering any of the paranormal in it?
Yes. It's going to be 60% history, 40% paranormal, although the numbers on that are kind of changing. Strangely enough, I can't find anything online saying that people have investigated Guilford Courthouse before, which is kind of strange, but it's a battle that's somewhat overlooked in terms of history. And so that honestly doesn't surprise me that people haven't investigated it, but there are a lot of paranormal claims here. And, when I go down there, I am going to do extensive investigations at about 7 different spots that I had picked out based upon, family connections, and then also where the most savage fighting took place. So it's going to be about as much a paranormal documentary as it is a historical documentary.
Well, awesome. Are you going to be covering, you had mentioned the Headless Horseman ghost. Are you going to be covering any of the local legends and such in that area as well?
I'm not going to really be covering any of the stuff outside of Guilford Courthouse because it's actually in the city of Greensboro.
Okay.
And there are so many legends in and around Greensboro that, I could probably make a documentary about each and every single one of them. And that is something I thought about doing. The original plan was I was going to do Guilford Courthouse, and then I was going to do some of the surrounding skirmishes and kind of do it was almost like a Revolutionary War compilation thing. As I'm driving to Guilford, I stop at these places and tell the story as I gradually get closer there. But it kind of had a shotgun effect when I was writing the notes. I didn't want it to be too scattered, because if you have a documentary project or just a film in general that's a bit too scatterbrained, then you run the risk of the audience losing interest in the film, which is definitely what I don't want to do. So I decided to kind of fine-tune my focus to just Guilford Courthouse.
And I think that's smart, because it's easy as a paranormal investigator when you go to a location that's got so many different pockets of places and stories that you can cover. It's easy to say, okay, well, while I'm here, I want to try to cover all of this. And especially when you're doing these battles as well, it's also easy to have to lose your audience by going in multiple directions, because there is so much to cover.
Right.
So you're definitely being smart about it, and I think that's the right way to do it. And you're setting yourself up to where once you do this, you could go back and have little offshoots of that.
Yeah, and that's something I do plan on doing. There's about 3 or 4 different battlefields in that area I want to check out. But, the Guilford Courthouse, there's so much that happened there. It wasn't just a standard people lined up in 2 lines, shot at each other. That's about it. And sometimes those soldiers reappear, hundreds of years later. There are so many small details that are important to not just the battle, but the American Revolutionary War itself. You literally had the foundation of America being cemented in stone at this battlefield. It was that important. And I really do not want to miss a single detail of that, because these soldiers, like I said, I think this battle is overlooked in history, and these soldiers have a very interesting story to tell, and I want to tell it. And if they want to share their side of things through the Spirit Box, EVP, or anything like that, then, I'm welcoming that.
Absolutely. And why not get it from the source?
Right. They know better than we do.
Absolutely. Yeah. So can you tell us, I know when you and I had talked before, you were talking about some of the roadblocks that you came through, and, a lot of the folks over here in the chat room, they're investigators, and they know that they're no stranger to technical difficulties and things. If something can go wrong, it'll go wrong during a paranormal investigation. So can you talk about any of that?
So this film is going to give me gray hairs by the end of this. I'm trying to enjoy my hair, looking at the camera as is, because once this gets released and, I eventually come back on the show one day, if you'll have me, I have all gray hairs. You'll be like, Jake, why you look 60 years old? I'll be like, oh, I'm 21 and a half. But the original plan was to go down and film this at the end of January. And at that point, the weather was nice, no snow in the forecast. It was a mild winter. And of course, we had these crazy storm systems hit, so I've had to postpone a lot of filming because of this. I did get in contact with a bunch of reenactors groups, which is the coolest part of this documentary for me. I contacted, I think it's about 40 some odd different groups, and many of them have sent me footage to use for free in the documentary.
Very nice.
So yeah, really, really cool of them to do. So I had all this footage, which was, I think I had up to 30 some odd videos. It was a huge folder. And I went to work one day, came back, was going to edit some of the footage, and the folder was gone. And so I checked 3 different places, couldn't find it, checked my downloads folder, because I have a bad habit sometimes of downloading files, and then I'll copy them into other folders, but I won't delete the original download files. And it takes up useless space, and that is something I need to get better about. So I figured, that might save me this time. I'll go back to that, and they were gone. And so I went back to my computer, went online to the downloads folder, where it shows you all the downloads that you've ever done offline or off the internet. And there was no evidence that I downloaded any of those videos. None of them existed. And so I had about 30 some odd videos that had been sent to me through email. Thank God the email wasn't, deleted, because that would have been tragedy right there. But I've never had that happen before or since. There was a really cool friend of mine, who was going to help me film the documentary. They're really, really good with filmmaking. And the day before, we were going to go on a Tuesday because it's going to be about 62 degrees in Greensboro in February, which is really cool, especially since it's like 30 degrees here. And the day before, they texted me and said, hey, I'm not feeling well. I'm going to get to the hospital real quick. So I was like, okay. No, they texted me on Sunday. So the next day, literally, I got off work, and then they shot me a text that said, hey, I just tested positive for the virus.
Oh, no.
And so I was like, oh, that sucks. It sucks for them more. But, I went ahead and moved my plans back a week. So I have a family member who's about as knowledgeable about the battle as I am, and I was going to go with them to Greensboro. They were going to help me out and all that stuff, especially since they have some extra charging stations. It was going to be perfect for my batteries. Mm-hmm. So literally 2 days before I go down there, and then we were going to head to Greensboro, their vehicle, which has been in the family for many years, has been very dependable. I think it had some work done on it recently, so it should have been fine. It clunked out and couldn't make the trip out of nowhere. So I had to postpone it another week. Now, this is about 2 weeks ago up to this point, and I had another friend of mine who was going to go with me. The day before, they text me, hey, sorry, I wasn't feeling well, and I just tested positive for the virus. So I have had 2 people test positive for the virus, vehicles, including mine, mess up, which my vehicle is very, very dependable, and it messed up. And I've had folders go missing. I've had pictures go missing, files go missing. I recorded about 30 minutes worth of narration for a little teaser video that I was going to do, and it deleted itself. And I'm not an idiot when it comes to electronics and this. I might be an idiot about some things, but not electronics. So I know I didn't accidentally hit something and delete it.
Right.
So at this point, I was talking with my uncle, and he was like, it sounds like, there's a spirit or something doesn't want their story told. And that, right. That introduced a whole new element to it, supernatural sabotage.
Right.
And so, when I go down there, one of the things I want to do now is I want to see, is there a spirit or an entity, good or bad, responsible for this film not being made? And it's weird because I've worked on several projects, a documentary before, 4 investigation episodes, some big investigations. I have had issues, like you said, I've had issues on those before, but never to this extent. And then the weirdest thing of all, this actually started last month, but it's really kicked, a whole new gear, is my hair. It's kind of tough to tell now. It's changing color. Usually I have dark brown hair, almost black. But there are now blonde streaks in the front of my hair and on the sides. And if you look on my Facebook page, you can see some of my photos, and there is clearly blonde in my hair. And I have asked, a barber, I've asked a person who has cut hair for 30 years, and they said that they have never heard anything like that in their lives. I've even had some friends of mine messaging me over Snapchat and stuff saying, hey, what dye do you use? Who did your hair? That looks great. I'm like, I don't know. So this has been a really, really weird project, and I can't wait to finish the project because the only thing I have left to do is get some additional footage. Most of it is shot and done already. Mm-hmm. I've got it saved actually on 3 or 4 different camera cards just in case one decides to delete itself. I've got backups. So I'm curious about what's going to happen once I finish the project, if, whatever this thing is going to rear its ugly head again.
Right. I mean, because I've had that happen with, different recorders, and, I'm not always the smartest when it comes to the computer, but I mean, I've learned very quick that it's like you always back up your stuff, and then you back up your backup, because you just never know when something's going to, just disappear. And it's very interesting that from the beginning you've had all of these bizarre things happen. So are you still, has it put you behind or anything? Are you still thinking that you're going to make your target date?
Oh, yes. I am going, by hook or by crook, I am going to make that date. And this has put me behind almost a month because, like I said earlier, my original plan was to have all the footage shot by January 28th. Therefore, I was going to have, a month to edit, a month to do the trailer. I haven't even released a proper trailer yet just because, I'm lacking certain footage, but I was going to have all of this stuff planned, and it's completely derailed this whole thing.
Well, hopefully, maybe this will get you back on track,
Yeah,
and
fingers
especially,
crossed.
especially since you're so respectful with how you deal with your documentaries and telling your stories and doing your investigations. So hopefully, if it is some type of entity that may not want their story told, hopefully maybe they'll see how you're telling the story, and maybe that opinion will change. It's just definitely interesting when that happens.
It is. And it's, like I said, I have had bad stuff happen before on investigations or leading up to investigation, but it's usually like one or two incidents. And it's
Mhm.
not, stuff that really sets the investigation back. It's stuff like, oh man, that's weird, or oh, that sucks anyway. But this is stuff that, actually destroys plans. And so it's been a learning experience, not just from an investigation perspective, but also a filmmaking perspective on, how to overcome this adversity.
Exactly. Well, I mean, they're used to, the spirits, they're fighting a war, so why not this type of this type of sabotage or warfare?
I
Whole
have to
different
give it. I have to give it, them credit. 18th century spirits figuring out how to delete files on a computer. I'm impressed.
level. So there's a college there in that area, isn't there?
Yeah, Guilford College, and that's actually
Okay.
close to where one of the main skirmishes took place early in the day. And it's got an auditorium. I can't remember the name of the auditorium off the top of my head, but there's supposedly Revolutionary War soldiers that are seen inside the auditorium.
Oh, very cool.
Mhm.
So for as far as the courthouse itself, is there any information or details that you can tell us about that?
So the courthouse was a single-story log cabin structure, and it was a very small house, basically. Which, at the front during the frontier times, that's typically how courthouses were. They were literally just someone's house that was safe from Native American attacks, and so they were able to get groups of people to make important decisions about the future of their county in these houses. And Guilford Courthouse was no different. Now, Guilford Courthouse burned in the 1800s, and people started moving away from it. The area actually became somewhat abandoned. It was mainly a Quaker community, which is why the battle was also so important, because these people were against, warfare. They didn't want anything to do with it. And here was, a bloody battle on their doorstep. So to this day, no one knows where the courthouse is. It's been a mystery for over 100 and some odd years now. While there are a few contemporary sketches and maps, including by a British engineer who sketched a order of battle map, which showed all the troop movements, all the buildings on the grounds, and he actually sketched this while sitting inside the courthouse about 2 hours after the battle ended.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So yes, it's really, really cool. I do have a copy of the map in my room printed out, so I've been using that as a reference source. But there have been millions of dollars spent, not just by the government, but by the state government, universities. The park itself has done a few excavations of the area, and for some reason, no one can find where the courthouse was. Now, more than likely, because it was just a simple cabin, there wouldn't be much left to this day. But that is one of the main mysteries of Guilford Courthouse. And it's very important, too, because the American Third Line, which is where the most savage fighting took place, it was near where the courthouse is. And to this day, we don't know exactly where all the troops were. So if we can find the courthouse, we can
Mhm.
kind of approximate where this fighting took place. And that, of course, is important for historical reasons as well as other reasons. So one of the things that I want to do going to Guilford, obviously, I want to find the courthouse,
Mhm.
but I want to use my spirit box EVPs, and I want the spirits themselves to lead me
Mhm.
to the courthouse because, they were there when the courthouse was still standing. So if anyone's going to know where it is for sure, it's going to be them.
Absolutely. Do you use dowsing rods?
I do not use dowsing rods.
Okay.
I've tried dowsing rods before, and I do believe they work,
Mhm.
but my hands shake way too much to
Okay.
use dowsing rods.
I was going to say that's a tool that I love using, and I know people have used the rods to find bodies in
Hmm.
cemeteries and find other bodies that are missing, and so that would be if you use them, I thought that would be kind of a neat tool to use to find to try to find the courthouse. But I think that using the spirit box and any of the other tools that you have is going to be a really cool thing to incorporate into your documentary.
I think so too, especially since this will be my 4th time visiting the battlefield. I've kind of, walked across the area where they think the courthouse is, and then, where 13-year-old me thought where the courthouse is. So there's somewhat of a process of elimination, and judging from modern day maps as well as contemporary maps drawn, after the battle, I have a good idea as to where the courthouse should be. And one of the things I plan on doing is walking into the woods where it is. Thank God the snakes won't be out because it's, wintertime. But I want to see if there are any remnants left in the dirt, especially since it's rained a lot lately. So, maybe something came to the surface.
Possibly. You never know.
Never know.
Did they lose any of their records or anything whenever they had the fire?
So to my knowledge, there weren't really any records kept in the courthouse itself, where it was such a small courthouse and where it wasn't a formal courthouse in the sense that, that's where they stored public records, marriage records, death certificates, stuff like that. I think they would have placed those in another courthouse in the area because there were a few actual courthouses. The closest one I think of would maybe be Charlotte, but a lot of times communities like that didn't keep records. They would have birth records and death records, but sometimes stuff in between, they really wouldn't care about that because, in their eyes, they had bigger fish to fry. And so in terms of whatever happened to the records, I honestly don't know. It's one of those mysteries.
Gotcha. And, I just want to point out too, if any of you folks in the chat room have any questions or anything for Jake regarding his documentary or about any of the locations that he's mentioned or visited, feel free to put them out there. I'm trying to man the chat room and pull up, if you have any questions or comments or anything, we're trying to highlight them and just go ahead and kick them out there. I know Jake would be happy to answer any of your questions as well. So,
heck yeah. I love it. And actually, Vicky Norris brought up a really interesting comment. She says, how wild is it to have a courthouse disappear? It's not like it was a random house with no documentation even back then. That's a really interesting point. There were even a lot of U.S. Army, U.S. military maps at the time that did show, there was a courthouse here. It would typically be, GH house is typically what they would identify it as. And there's actually... I think Nathaniel Green drew a map, or his engineer, and there are a few different points of reference for this region. And one of the main ones is Guilford Courthouse. So it was a fairly well-known location, also because it was strategically important. There were a few intersecting roads that led to Virginia and then further into North and South Carolina. Now, unfortunately, like I said earlier, it was just a simple log cabin structure. And unfortunately, kind of like we don't know where every log cabin stood, in the history of North Carolina or Virginia. Unfortunately, I think Guilford Courthouse kind of fell to the same fate. And then also, as Greensboro grew around it, I think people kind of forgot about the little community of Guilford because, like most towns back then, you would have one house and then the closest one wouldn't be for like 2 or 3 miles away. And that's kind of how the layout of the land was at Guilford.
Right. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it wasn't uncommon for some of these courthouses to catch on fire. I know that in my hometown where I'm from, the Huntsville courthouse, I know they've gone through several different renditions of theirs. And it was, Andrew Johnson gave a speech on the courthouse steps and everything. And it was intricate during the Civil War. And I think they've had 3 or 4 different courthouses, and one of them burned as well. So, so now that I'm thinking about it, I know of several different courthouses that have burned and have been rebuilt kind of off. They may just be a few yards from where they were originally built, but a lot of them were moved. So that really wasn't as uncommon. But I think that especially as important as this one played in the Revolutionary War, I think that it's going to be definitely cool if you can locate or get some answers to kind of send you in that direction.
Right. And to be completely honest with you, I have no idea what I would do if I actually found the courthouse. Like, as a crazy hypothetical situation, if I were, to be led by a spirit to a certain location and just having to see like a piece of wood on the ground, there is a good chance I might lose my mind. Like a kid on Christmas morning, that's exactly what would happen. And then usually they would, remote places. That is true. It was the frontier. They were still worrying about Native American attacks, usually the Cherokee Indians, Shawnee Indians, and stuff like that. So courthouses would usually be like small forts.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was the only place that they deemed was safe enough to bring a lot of important figures from not just the local area, but also from the big cities, the big towns, to this place to hash out these legal matters. And, unfortunately, Guilford Courthouse, it was somewhat of a small plantation. There was also a farm, the Hotchkiss Farm, which was, where the British deployed. It's actually kind of cool. The Hotchkiss family, I think his name was Jedediah Hotchkiss, but he was originally from Pennsylvania. And when the war broke out, he moved his family, his very young family. I think he was in his mid-20s when he got married and when it all broke out. But he moved his family to Guilford, North Carolina, to get away from the war, because he figured in North Carolina, it'll never see a battle. They're not going to fight around here. Kind of like Wilmer McLean in the Civil War moved from Bull Run to Appomattox. That's exactly what happened with Jedediah Hotchkiss.
And I can see that. I mean, because there wasn't a whole lot of states at that time.
No.
So a lot of the South and anything, further over west, there wasn't a lot of. I mean, it was all Native American country or Native American area at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and, it's kind of interesting. Guilford Courthouse was also one of the early battlefields that saw attempts at preservation. In the late 1800s, they really tried to save a lot of the land, mainly where the third line fighting was. And there were actually some early monuments that were erected on the battlefield. And you can go online, you can see pictures of these monuments, and they're really cool looking monuments. I wish they were still standing, but unfortunately, when World War II came around, 1942, 1943, they actually tore down these monuments because there was a shortage of certain materials and stuff. And so Guilford Courthouse actually volunteered to give up a lot of their monuments, which indicated certain locations and markers of troop movements, buildings, and stuff like that in order to help fund the war effort.
Wow, that's wild. I mean, because just to have the peace of mind or the presence of mind to erect these structures and stuff to remember and know that it was a significant moment. I mean,
right.
Just don't see as much of that back that early.
Right. And it's also kind of cool that, almost a few hundred years later, they were still contributing to the American cause, by helping out in World War II. Now, unfortunately, we lost some markers for troop movements, troop locations, and scenes of certain action, which kind of sucks because it seems like they did it in haste. Mm-hmm. And they really didn't mark, or erect new markers saying, hey, in this spot, this monument stood, and this is what it, signified. So unfortunately, a lot of the information that was on those monuments is lost to history.
Gotcha. So do they have like a museum or anything with some of that over in the area, or did they just kind of have the stuff in the new courthouse? I mean, were you able to see some of that and actually talk to do any interviews with any of the folks that's in the area?
So they do actually have the Guilford Courthouse National Battlefield Visitor Center, which is a mouthful to say, but it's a really cool basically museum. We've got one similar to it, the Virginia Museum of the Civil War, and kind of like what we have up here, they do an amazing job with taking care of their artifacts. They've got this really cool diorama, and it basically shows an overhead view of the battlefield, all the troop movements. They've got little models of the courthouse, and I remember standing there for like 10 minutes straight just looking at it, and I'm sure everyone thought, that guy's been there an awful while. You think he's okay? Better watch for him drooling on it. But they've also got this, it's a little film. I think it's like 25, 30 minutes long, but it basically tells the story of the battle through these really cool reenactment footage that was provided by a lot of really cool filmmakers that I've actually been in contact with a few times. So they do a really good job at preserving the memory and the history of the battle. And unfortunately, I didn't really get to talk to many of them because unfortunately I went the first time during a very busy time. And also I seemingly know a good bit about the battle. So, I really didn't want to bother them with, small questions.
Right. Did any of them have any of them that you talked to, did any of them have any stories or experiences that they've had at the courthouse that's paranormal?
So I talked to one, I'm not going to say his name, but he was telling me that he was doing his rounds at about 5:30, making sure everyone had left the park. And he said that he got to where the American second line was, which is where the Virginia militia and Continentals were. And he thought he saw movement in the woods near the cannons. Now, the Greensboro kind of built around Guilford Courthouse. And there's actually a well-known park, the Greensboro Park, which is a really cool park next to it. And there's actually a cemetery built on the battlefield. It's a huge cemetery, which is, perfect recipe for hauntings. But he assumed that some teenagers, some kids had snuck in and that they were going to vandalize the property or do stuff like that. So he got his flashlight out and was, trying to track these kids down. And he said that he saw about 3 or 4 different shadow figures taken off through the woods. And he said that as he got closer to where they were, he started smelling gunfire. And he said that, he had seen enough, he called them ghost shows. He had seen enough ghost shows to know that, it was probably ghost soldiers that he was seeing. And so, he walked back and he ended up telling his supervisor about that. And apparently it was almost like a running joke between them that they would see these 3 or 4 shadow figures close to where the cannons are on the American second line. And they typically see them at about the same time every day. And they seem to be intelligent because they have interacted with the park rangers that are seemingly trying to close the park down.
Wow. And that was going to be my next question, as far as residual versus intelligent activity. Have you seen a difference there as far as the type of activity?
I think about 80% of the activity at Guilford Courthouse is residual. Just like I think about 70 to 75% of activity at any and all battlefields are residual, simply because there was such an imprint that was left on the environment, on the grounds, on the artifacts that, there has to be something left. Whether it's intelligent or not, I believe there's something always there. Guilford Courthouse, there are some intelligent spirits. There's also some at the Hotchkiss Farm. They've done a really good job preserving that. And some people claim to see, members of the Hotchkiss family walking around. They claim to see British soldiers forming up for battle. And when you approach them, sometimes they'll speak to you and stuff like that. So there seems to be more intelligent spirits at Guilford Courthouse than maybe most battlefields, especially Revolutionary War.
Okay. And especially since the fact that you're going to be telling their story. So hopefully, you'll be able to put some stuff out that a lot of people don't know, since it is a relatively, not really unknown, but uninvestigated location.
Yeah. And, one of the cool things about this project is, I was trying to figure out how I want to style the film. Because, if you watch, even my first documentary, you watch any paranormal documentary or episode, they always follow a set formula. You have the introduction, you have the history, background, and then you have the investigation and review. Everyone has their own little variant of this, but basically everyone follows the same exact formula. And that's because this formula works. That's why I use it. But with Guilford Courthouse, because there's so many minor details and there's so much that went on, I thought that if I followed that model, people would either get bored, or by the time I actually started investigating, people would forget about, the historical significance of these certain locations, simply because, I might be at one spot. Yeah, it is a lot to take in. Even someone like me who lives and breathes this stuff, it is a lot to take in. So the way I'm styling this, I'm actually doing the introduction as usual. But when it comes to the historical aspect, I think I have about 30 minutes saved of, Southern Campaign. I am going to talk a good bit about, leading up to that, why it's so important, what happened, what led to Guilford Courthouse. But when it comes to the battle itself, I'm going to talk about, the skirmishes. I won't investigate any of the skirmish locations, unfortunately, because one is a college, and I really don't want to, be walking around by myself with a camera and spirit box on school property. And then the others are shopping centers. So, you can only do so much there. But when it comes to the first line, I'm going to do the history of the first line, paranormal claims, and then my investigation. And I'm going to do that at the same for the second line, third line, separate actions, so that you don't lose the historical significance. And also where it'll be somewhat fragmented like that, I think it'll help the pacing of the film, kind of not really be frenetic, but it won't be a slow, Sunday morning documentary that puts you to sleep in like 10 minutes.
Right. Well, battlefields are hard, and, I really enjoy investigating those, but for me, they're always kind of hard to highlight because there is so much when you have, the different lines and the campaigns and then all the different stories surrounding it. I got to give you mad props for what you're doing, because I know that that's a big challenge to cover that, just because there is so much when it comes to putting something together, even if it's just a simple investigation about a battlefield. And you start getting, especially like when you start getting into the Civil Wars and that sort of thing, there's just so much. So it sounds like you're putting it together very well, and, that you're doing a beautiful job on it. We've got a question over here from Janet. She says, how long is the total length of the documentary?
So I actually haven't sat down and edited the whole project yet. But the goal is to have it between an hour and 15 minutes long to an hour and 30 minutes long. But the goal is to have a total of about 4.5 to 5 hours worth of footage shot. Now, the reason I want so much footage shot is because, there might be some side projects I want to do in the future. There might be some spotlight things I want to do with it. And then, of course, like you were saying earlier, there's so much information to cover, not just, the battle itself, but the characters involved, the background, the campaign. So inevitably, I'm going to gloss over or completely miss some very key moments. And I can already hear the YouTube comments and Facebook comments going, you didn't talk about this, but you can only fit so much in an hour and a half, depending upon also, because I haven't finished my evidence review yet, which is really, really bad. But depending upon how much paranormal evidence that I get, that will also be a major factor into how long the documentary is. So at some point, I probably will do another side project where, the unused footage and all that stuff will be used in the film. But I do want to cover most of the story of the Southern campaign, the characters involved leading up to it, the battle itself, the paranormal aspect, and then, have like a grand review at the end of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Keep it on the big picture with the courthouse, because you can get into family stories and specific stories of different regiments and different groups. And that's what's to me is so overwhelming. And when I look at, because we've got a lot of battlefields here in the Tennessee Tennessee and northern Georgia area. Everybody talks about Gettysburg and everything, but Chickamauga battlefield and some of those, and so for me, I'd love to cover something like that, but I get so overwhelmed because there is so much that you can cover, so many different paranormal stories and so many different stories of just, different areas rather than just the battlefield. But my next question, as far as like other, projects and stuff, I know you've got a lot going on here in 2021. And since, time's kind of starting to wind down, do you want to talk about anything kind of out there a little bit that you're working on that you'll be bringing out later on this year?
So I do have a lot of projects in the works. I actually, a week ago, announced that I was going to do a nice little video on the legend of Alice Flagg, which was the very first ghost story that I ever read about and became fascinated with. And it's actually one of the main reasons I'm in the paranormal field today. So that's a very complex and intricate story that I'm going to do a video on probably first week of March or something like that. Obviously, I can't get South Carolina. But there are a few locations that I'm looking at investigating in March. Because this is mainly a historical documentary with, a lot of paranormal elements, most people I recognize and realize that, they kind of get turned off by history. Unfortunately, not everyone is as into history as you and I might be, especially, the mass audience. I know a lot of our followers are really cool about history. They love it just as much as we do. And, that's really, really cool. But in terms of the general public, they're more paranormal. So when you have a strong history film, they might be more apt to turn it off within 15, 20 minutes. And, that's fine. Everyone has their own unique interests, and that's what makes this field really cool. So in March or April, I do plan on doing a fully paranormal documentary at some point. And then the big project I want to do this summer is I'm going to be going back to my hometown in southern West Virginia, where I grew up, and I'm going to be interviewing people about their Bigfoot experiences and encounters. And then I'm actually going to be going into the woods of southern West Virginia, and I keep talking myself out of it, but I know I'm going to do it. But I'm actually going to do a Bigfoot expedition investigation. I don't quite know what you would call it, but it's basically going to be, the West Virginia Bigfoot. And that's going to be my big summer project.
Very cool. I know several paranormal investigators that have kind of transitioned over to doing some Bigfoot exploring. And it's not something that I've done yet, but I've had several people on that. And actually Ryan Rush, who's going to be on Saturday, he's a Bigfoot guy.
Oh, nice.
And that's kind of his side more so than the paranormal. But I definitely find it interesting. And West Virginia, Tennessee, Kentucky, all those areas just have such a rich Bigfoot history. So
yeah,
I look forward to seeing your big project.
I am too. And, there's part of me, I can already picture myself, late at night in the middle of nowhere, the woods of southern West Virginia, no cell phone reception, me and maybe 2 or 3 other people. And I'm out there, like Bobo from Finding Bigfoot, making like stupid calls into the night. I already know that's going to happen. And it's going to be a lot of fun working on it, especially since, I get to see a lot of my old friends, a lot of old teachers. I've had a lot of people reach out to me saying, hey, I just had this experience. I want to tell you about it. So it's really cool that they're willing to go on camera and talk about their experiences because, we're in the 21st century, but sometimes those sightings are downplayed a little bit. And, some people, when you share those experiences, they kind of make fun of them. So it is really cool that they're willing to put themselves in that spot, to help me out. And I'm very, very thankful.
Absolutely. And I mean, let's be honest, there's no better place to be than deep in the woods, no cell phone service. To me, there's nothing better. I mean, that's the best way to spend a Saturday night,
Oh, heck yeah. And with the luck I'm having with this project, I'm really curious about what kind of luck I'm going to have when it comes to, Bigfoot. Because over the years, I have had some close encounters with Bigfoot. And, my last experience was I actually have not footage of the Bigfoot, unfortunately, but of the sounds recorded. And I think that's about as close as I want to get. So, there's part of me that doesn't want to tempt fate, but then there's that other bigger part of me that's like, do it.
Right.
And I'm probably going to give into that side.
Well, I just pulled Chuck Sutherland's comment up, and he's definitely, if you want Bigfoot research, he's in Michigan, and
they've got the Dog Man.
Yes. And, he knows his stuff when it comes to Bigfoot. So I'll send you a link to his group and some of his information because he speaks on it and very knowledgeable about Bigfoot and does a lot of retreats and such up in the Michigan area. So
that would be awesome.
So we may have to take you up on that offer, Chuck, and head up there and check out the Michigan Bigfoot.
Yep. But no Dogman. I will not investigate Michigan Dogman. There are a few things in this world I will not investigate, and Michigan Dogmen are one of those things. Those and Wendigos.
Hey, we all have our limits.
We do. I'll even do dolls.
Oh, dolls. I like dolls, but they're a little bit creepy.
They are. I've seen a doll move before, and I almost broke down the door of the location we were at. So, I've had my experiences with haunted dolls.
There's just something about that I don't know, just small things like that. And then just their facial expressions and stuff when you actually get responses and get movement. I mean, creepy.
Yeah, I mean, this is real quick, but we were invited to this place in Pennsylvania once. I'm not going to say the name of it, but basically they had this room that was a portal to hell. And if you were locked in this room, terrible things would happen to you. But it was a cool location. The people there were very nice to us. And I was locked in the room. And I had the lights on because there was part of me that was a little apprehensive. And the spirit box wasn't doing anything. So I had the EVP going. And I asked, if there's anyone here, do something. Prove to me you exist. I was going all Zach Bagans on it. And there was this stupid baby doll that was sitting, maybe like 3 feet in front of me. And I swear, hand on the Bible, I saw its arm go like this, raise up. At that moment, I was done. I got out of that chair. Even though, the door was locked, I was fiddling at the knob. I was kicking the door. I was done at that point. I was done.
Yeah, I think I would have, I don't really get creeped out, but that just sounds like a creepy experience.
Yeah, that was you might need some new, undergarments.
And I pulled Peter Alice Acosta Burgess Willis up on there, and I would definitely like to investigate the ghost children of Forest Falls, California. And I am tacos are one of my favorite things. Tacos and salt.
Here.
So again, we may take you up on that. Me and Jake will just need to do a little tour of cryptids and that sort of thing. And
good old road trip.
Cryptids and tacos.
With an emphasis on the tacos.
Yes, Taco Tuesday every day.
Sounds like a plan to me.
All right. Well, it looks like we're about to wrap up on time. So and what I'm going to do is I'm going to re-release this on YouTube afterwards. And I will also go in and put your links again to Fife Paranormal, Fife Photography, and also, where they can find you. So if you want to go ahead and kind of put that out there where people can find you, where they can watch the documentary, and really just anything else that you would like to plug in the next few minutes.
Okay, so first off, I'd like to thank everyone for tuning into this show. It really means a lot to me. Thank you once again for Miranda having me on the show. I know I bug you time to time to be on the show, but it's always a lot of fun. You can contact us at Fife Paranormal, Facebook.com/Fife Paranormal, or YouTube.com/Fife Paranormal, and we are also on Instagram and Twitter under those same names. And the documentary is going to be released next Saturday, the 27th, I believe. And the plan is to have it up by 6 p.m. on the Facebook page and the YouTube channel. So they'll be up there at the same time simultaneously. Now, I am planning on hosting a watch party on the 27th. Yeah, for the premiere of it. So I'll be answering questions, and, I'll be watching myself on camera, which is always, no bueno. But basically, if you have any questions, anything like that, any stories you would like to share, feel free to contact me on any of those pages. I love any and all questions, and, I'll do my best to answer them.
Yeah, Jake is so responsive and just so knowledgeable about the history of locations and what he's working on, and he's always open and welcome to questions and comments from people. So definitely, if he says reach out to him, take him up on that, because he is very knowledgeable about that. So and again, I would also like to express the same thanks that Jake put out there to everyone that's commented, watched the show, shared, and put your questions out there. I really appreciate you guys. You guys are the best folks, and we wouldn't have a show if it wasn't for you. So I definitely appreciate that. And like I said, we didn't get to have a show last Thursday. We didn't have one on Tuesday anyways. So we didn't get to have a show last Thursday, but we will this Saturday. The much anticipated Rhine Rush will be on, fingers crossed, because, again, we've tried to do that 2 times and it's not worked out, but He's got some great stories. We're going to be talking about missing 411 and some really interesting topics that he covers on his show and that I find very interesting. So that will be a special night, Saturday night at 10 p.m. Eastern time, 9 Central. And next week, I've got the folks from Task Force Paranormal, as well as the folks from the Cleek Mansion, which is in Athens, Tennessee. It's also known as the Scream Chamber. And they are putting on a big event in March. We'll have more information on that, but they're having a big event in March, Paracon, if you will. And I think it's called Scream Fest. And I will be there as a special guest, as well as several other paranormal investigators and vendors. And they're going to have the Scream Chamber, the Cleek Mansion open that night. So a lot of cool things coming up. They'll be on next week. And got quite a few guests lined up through the month of March and up until the end of April. So, and then a bunch of different events. We've had, a lot of things coming up that, as far as haunted motorcycle rides and paracons that I'll be announcing soon. I've kind of been holding off on announcing a few things just because of the weather and people trying to finalize some different details and such. So hopefully within the next couple days, we'll be inundating you guys with a ton of information. So, and then I should be getting the information about Ryan here in the next day or so too. So again, thank you guys. And thank you so much for coming on, Jake. And I am just looking forward to seeing this documentary and looking forward to getting a collaboration investigation scheduled with you.
Oh, heck yeah. That's long overdue. So
yes.
Hopefully we'll be able to set that up soon.
Absolutely. Well, everyone, I hope you have a great night. And again, thoughts and prayers to all the folks who are in the Mid-South, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas. I know they're dealing with some extreme weather and blackouts and everything. So thoughts and prayers to all of them. And everyone stay warm and stay safe. And we will see you on Saturday night. Take care.
Yep. Good night.